Hi, David. Welcome back to the People Quotient Podcast. Good to have you back.
Nice to see you again, Rohit.
David, this is our episode in the series on leadership. We previously covered peak performing teams or high performing teams, peak performing individuals, and we talked a lot about how leaders, especially exceptional leaders, identify peak performing individuals, motivate them. That results in high performing teams. And one thing that I think you wanted to come back to was this point around moments. It also brought me back to the conversation we had in the last episode about balcony moments, that peak performing individuals have a balcony moment. And I think tying that to this point around leaders have their moments in their practice. Do you want to talk a little bit about how those who are either not doing a lot of this work or doing some of this work can make this as part of their practice? So after this episode, at least they can have a toolkit to say, okay, I'm going to do one thing that will make me a better leader from prior to listening to this conversation.
Yeah. So I think, there's groundwork, and then there are the moments that I was referring to, the being rather than doing moment, right?
Yeah.
The being moments are all about checking in on how am I doing against the things that I said were important to me as a person and as a leader. And those things are defined in the groundwork. And the groundwork is really around those foundational elements of the framework that I was talking about around awareness and sense of purpose. Right. So on awareness, I would typically do an exercise with people around what is important to me. Who am I? Who do I want to be? How do I want people to experience me? If someone was to go out and interview the people that I lead, or the most important people in my life, or whatever category, whatever you want to define, what would I want them to be saying about me? What are the words that I would want them to be using about me? And as I think about those words, how would I need to be behaving? What behaviors would I need to be demonstrating in order for people to use those words as descriptors of me as a person, or as a leader, or as a father, or as a friend? Again, I would encourage people to be as holistic about this as possible.
Yeah.
You're defining that script for yourself, if you like, around the awareness. And on the sense of purpose, it's thinking about, and what do I want to do with my life? What do I want to achieve? Why are those things important to me? But then also, as we touched on, how do I want to achieve those things, right? How do I want to be on my journey to achievement? Who do I want to carry along with me? What do I want to create around me as I'm on that journey? And that becomes your check-in. So when you're in your being moments, when you're stepping off the treadmill, you're checking in. How am I doing against the things that I said were important to me about who I am, about what my values are, about how I'm living my life, about the behaviors that I'm demonstrating, about the impact that I'm having on people around me, on how they would be describing me? How am I doing on those things? Where am I doing well? And where I am doing well, how am I doing that? So that I don't just leave it to chance, but that I start to double down on those things. And where am I not doing so well? And what's the reason for that? What's getting in the way? And that becomes your self-sustaining, reflective, human being series of moments. You don't have to go on a retreat for 2 weeks, right, to think about these things. You just need moments. And it's the consistency of small moments that helps you to deliver the consistency then of your actual behaviors. Is what I'm saying to myself what I'm actually living? And if it is, fantastic. How do I make sure I keep that going? And if it isn't, what am I going to do about it?
Yeah, I think one of the exercises that I do with a lot of CEOs that I work with, and again, what I enjoy the most is building companies, and obviously it's all about the people, hence the name of the podcast, but is effectively a self-reflective scorecard. So I think what you're describing is a bit of that, slightly different, but I call it the awareness sort of scorecard, and in different stages. So depending on whether somebody is leading a large organization that's going through transformative change, or somebody who's actually in that sort of middle management in a large business unit. Whatever your situation is, the elements are slightly different because you're in a different part of the journey depending on the organization. So it is a bit more of an operational awareness scorecard, but it is what you're describing, which is allowing the person to create that moment for themselves. And then I often tell people, every time we talk, let's just put that on your calendar every quarter and make sure you put it on someone else's calendar too, so they can remind you. And it's about self-accountability. And it is hard because a lot of us get buried with work, and it's really hard to sort of say, okay, I'll get to it. And you deprioritize this. That your counsel and coaching here is, if you wish to be a leader of any organization or team, and you wish to build high-performing teams to achieve that, which includes peak-performing individuals, then you've got to have this practice, because absent this practice, you've got no shot. I think you can get lucky, and luck has never been most people, at least my strategy. So if you want to be consistently performing at that level, you've got to have this practice, which actually brings me to a topic, David, that I often come across is when I'm working with organizations and especially boards that are trying to bring in a new CEO, I often hear this conversation about charismatic leader. I often ask that question, what are you solving for in your CEO? And, I get this word charismatic, and I often don't know how to process it because I'm not sure if that definition jives well in my head to what an organization might need. Is that something that when you have worked with, you've worked with obviously McKinsey and the Red Bull Racing and public sector, where does that manifest and what does that mean? And should people or companies be thinking about charismatic leaders, or is there a better way to really think about that charisma that people get enamored by?
Yeah. There'll be a lot of people, I suspect, listening in and recoiling at the word charismatic, right? Because how many of us really, really believe we are charismatic, right? So, it feels like it's a high thing to reach for, right? So most of us would recoil at that, thinking, well, I'm never going to get recruited for that role because, hey, I'm not rah bouncing off the walls and with this unbelievably crazy character and so on. A cold shiver goes through me when I'm sat in a room and the board are recruiting for a charismatic leader. Some of the often quietest people, Xabi Alonso, who we were talking about before, some leaders that I've worked with at Peloton, many leaders that I've worked with at McKinsey, some people that I've worked with at the Global Fund at the United Nations, immediately just coming to mind. I would actually describe them as very quiet people, but my word, they were inspirational and aspirational leaders. So I say that, Rohit, to your point, I just caution against the word charismatic, because for most of us, it conjures up a very particular image of a person, a very particular definition of how they might show up. And I think it does a disservice to those who are quieter, but unbelievably powerful as people and as leaders, right? So to me, it's a surface level descriptor. And I'd be much more interested in what are the behaviors that we want and or need in the leader of our organization or our team or our department, or again, whatever your circumstances are. What are the behaviors that we want a leader to demonstrate? And if those behaviors manifest and are produced by somebody who is, if we define it that way, charismatic, terrific. And if those behaviors are demonstrated by someone who is, let's put it this way, quieter, terrific. It's the behaviors that we want, not the headline, because the headline, we're all going to have various definitions and interpretations of it. And some of us will be attracted to or scared away from that headline definition. But we can all, I think, more easily align and get excited by the type of behaviors, the type of principles, the type of values, the type of beliefs that we want our company leader, our department leader, whatever it might be, to demonstrate.
Yeah, I think it's spot on because I often go back to, the simple questions of what are you solving for? And I think every organization has something very specific. So the question usually for the board or for the CEO looking for someone else on their team, quote unquote, charismatic, is like, first let's go back to what are you solving for, both quantitatively and qualitatively, and then sort of develop a version of what that would look like rather than this word charismatic. I just sort of ask because it comes up so often. I do have one question that when you look at the world of politics, and we won't spend too much time in politics, but that is one place where I do think that I've often seen charisma and ability to impress large masses of crowds or being able to go influence people who are not on your same side. I often think that in that world, the word charismatic comes up as well. And I know you've worked in the highest levels of British politics and with people who run countries. And so how have you seen that manifest, or is that just an outsider's perception and reality is quite different on the inside?
So the human condition is the human condition. And, meaning we all have our hopes and aspirations. We all have our fears and doubts. We all have our worries and concerns. We all have our self-limiting beliefs. We all have our joys and our pleasures. How all of this shows up can sometimes look very different depending on the walk of life that you happen to be on. So what politicians tend to be good at is certainly senior politicians. They tend to be good at communication. They tend to be good at telling a story, okay? Without getting into the politics of it, because, if you're right, you're either switched on or switched off, depending on the politician and the party and the policies and so on. So if we strip that away and just talk about the art of mobilizing support and engagement, if you can't do that in politics, you are really going to struggle. If we just think about it as an art form, and yes, there are some people to whom that comes more easily, and you might describe those as the more charismatic.
Yeah.
There are others who have to work on it a bit more, and you might describe that, those people as you wouldn't put them in the charismatic bracket, but you would say, my goodness me, that was an unbelievably powerful speech. I love that. That really moved me, or that really engaged me, even if you don't see that person as a naturally charismatic person. I think the lesson for the rest of us that I would encourage us all to think about is you've got to be true to yourself.
Yeah.
Don't try to be what you're not, right? Yeah. Don't believe you have to be charismatic in order to be a good leader. Not true.
Yeah.
Or that you have to be naturally gifted at something in order to be good at that something. Not true. We can learn these things. And in fact, I would say learning them and then delivering them in your authentic style, with your authentic views and beliefs and your authentic sense of purpose. That's what makes you a powerful leader or a powerful communicator. It's not the charisma. Yeah. It's the root, right? It's the basis from which you are appearing as your true, authentic self. You can work on the skills of delivery, of oratory, and so on. That's a skill. But what's lying at the heart of it? Is it a true, real, passionate, sense of purpose-based, authentic message that you're delivering? You can work on the skill of delivering it, right?
Yeah.
But if you're just great at delivering it, but there's no authenticity at the heart of it.
I think it also brings up the point that you raised up in a case of peak performing individuals, which is this notion of interference, right? I think it sort of ties back to that a lot of us, whether we've created this version of whatever charismatic is for ourselves or for other people, it sort of creates a sense of interference that I'm not that. And I think what your counsel is that's not at all true.
Yeah.
And it is in fact, reducing that. And anyone who's listening now, like if they want to revisit, you go back to that previous episode where we break down how interferences come about and how to actually get rid of them or at least minimize them to increase your overall performance. I think to me, that's where this sort of ties in really nicely. Subscribe to the People Quotient channel where leadership meets action. Powerful conversations with practical insights that you can use right now. See you in the next episode.